top 10 most brutal serial killers ever. These are not just the standard notorious serial killers. These are some of the most horrific killers to have been found guilty of their crimes. They are on this list either because of the nature of their crime, or the sheer number of their killings. In no particular order. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, Jr., also known as the Killer Clown, was an American serial killer and rapist who sexually assaulted and murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men between 1972 and 1978 in Chicago, Illinois. All of Gacy's known murders were committed inside his Norwood Park Township home. His victims would typically be lured to this address by force or deception, and all but one victim were murdered by either asphyxiation or strangulation with a tourniquet. Gacy buried 26 of his victims in the crawl space of his home. 3 further victims were buried elsewhere on his property, while the bodies of his last 4 known victims were discarded in the Des Plaines River. Gacy was sentenced to death for 12 of these killings on March 13, 1980. He spent 14 years on death row before he was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. Hakeem Crawl. Crawl was a German serial killer and cannibal. He was known as the Ruhr Cannibal, and the Duisburg Man-Eater, Duisburger Menschenfresser. He was convicted of 8 murders, but confessed to a total of 13. On July 3, 1976, Crawl was arrested for kidnapping and killing a 4-year-old girl named Marion Kidder. As police went from home to home, a neighbor approached a policeman and told him that the waste pipe in his apartment building had blocked up, and when he had asked his neighbor, Crawl, whether he knew what had been blocking the pipe, Crawl had simply replied, "Guts." Upon this report, the police went up to Crawl's apartment and found the body of the Kidder girl cut up. Some parts were in the fridge, a hand was cooking in a pan of boiling water, and the intestines were found stuck in the waste pipe. Crawl said that he often sliced portions of flesh from his victims to cook and eat them, claiming that he did this to save on his grocery bills. In custody, he believed that he was going to get a simple operation to cure him of his homicidal urges and would then be released from prison. Instead, he was charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. In April 1982, after a 151-day trial, he was convicted on all counts and was given 9 life sentences. He died of a heart attack in 1991 in the prison of Rheinbach, near Bonn. Richard Chase. Richard Chase was an American serial killer who believed that the Nazis were turning his blood into powder by poison they had planted below his soap dish. As a result, he was constantly afraid of running out of blood. He would shoot his victims, have sex with the dead body, and then bathe in the resulting pool of blood. Of the number of small children he killed, he ate their internal organs and drank their blood. He was eventually arrested and sentenced to the gas chamber. However, on the 26th of December 1980, he was found to have committed suicide in prison. Gary Ridgway. Gary Leon Ridgway is the American serial killer known as the Green River Killer. He was initially convicted of 48 separate murders and later confessed to nearly twice that number. As part of his plea bargain, an additional conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the most prolific American serial killer in history according to confirmed murders. He murdered numerous women and girls in Washington state during the 1980s and 1990s. Most of his victims were alleged to be prostitutes and other women in vulnerable situations, including underage runaways. Amatzah Reggie. The cattle breeder from Indonesia admitted to killing 32 girls and women between 1986 to 1997. As a part of his ritual, he used to bury them waist deep. Bodies were found in a cigar cane field with their heads facing his house, which he believed would give him more power. Reggie was sentenced to death by a firing squad in 2008. Daniel Camargo Barbosa. Daniel Camargo Barbosa was a Colombian serial killer. It is believed that he raped and killed over 150 young girls in Colombia and Ecuador during the 1970s and 1980s. Camargo's mother died when he was a little boy, and his father was overbearing and emotionally distant. He was raised by an abusive stepmother, who punished him and sometimes dressed him in girls' clothing, making him a victim of ridicule in front of his peers. Vineet Ball. Vineet Ball was a serial killer from Lahore, Pakistan who was purported to have killed more than 100 boys before the long arm of the law finally caught up with him. He initially sexually abused 2 minor boys in June 1998, for which he was supposed to go to prison. He was let off on bail after serving a very short time. It was then that the murderous rage took over. He would stand on street corners and charm boys and men. Once they agreed to come with him, he would drug and rape them. Then he strangled and dismembered their bodies. Then he dunked these dismembered pieces in hydrochloric acid to dissolve them. He would then dump the remains in the public sewers. He would keep the clothes and shoes of his victims as personal mementos. At his sentencing he showed no remorse. He is reported to have said, "I am Vineet Ball, killer of 100 children. I hate this world. I am not ashamed of my action and I am ready to die. I have no regrets. I killed 100 children." Tsutomu Miyazaki. He got more names due to his hideous acts. Some of them were the otaku murderer, the little girl murderer, or Dracula Miyazaki. The reason for this being that he abducted little girls, killed them and indulged in sexual activities with their corpses. On one occasion, he not only drank the victim's blood but ate her hand as well. He also preserved body parts as trophies and sent postcards to the families describing the murder. His father committed suicide and Miyazaki was hanged in 2008, aged 45. Lynn Sells. Lynn Sells was an American serial killer. Sells is believed by police to have murdered at least 22 people. Sells said he committed his first murder at age 16, while breaking into a house. While in the house, Sells discovered a man performing fellatio on a young boy. Sells killed the man in a fit of rage. On January 3, 2014, a Del Rio judge set Sells' execution date for April 3, 2014. Sells' death sentence was carried out at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Ridgway. On the number 1 position of this terrible list is a man who can be called the father of serial killing. It is especially sad because prior to turning to a life of crime, he was a celebrated military captain in the Army of St. Joan of Arc. Born in 1404, Ridgway raped, tortured and killed hundreds of little children, mostly boys. He was attracted to blonde, blue-eyed little boys. He would promise them sweets and treats and lure them to his castle. He would then torture and mutilate them in the most inhuman methods possible, ejaculating over the dying children. His greatest pleasure lay in bathing in their blood. He liked to stab them in the jugular vein and enjoy the squirting blood sprouting over him. After the deed was done, he was immensely regretful and would whip himself and pray for hours on in the family chapel. His servants were left to burn the bodies in the fireplace and clean the room bathing in blood.